I can still feel the weight of that night pressing against my chest. The night everything changed. The house was glowing with the warm light of chandeliers, the kind of golden light that makes everything look soft and welcoming, at least from the outside. Elise, my son's wife, had spent the entire afternoon setting up the table, as if she were competing with the glossy pages of a lifestyle magazine. Polished cutlery, wine glasses so clear you could see your reflection, a roast sitting proudly in the middle of the table, surrounded by sides carefully arranged in ceramic bowls. But even as I sat down, I felt it, the tension hiding beneath the perfect presentation. The house, a countryside home just outside Lyon, smelled of rosemary, garlic, and freshly baked bread. But to me, it all tasted like ashes the moment the first chuckle escaped from across the table. It was my nephew Mark. He leaned in toward his sister Clara, whispering something that made her smirk, then cover her mouth with her hand as though she could hide her laughter. I caught it. I always catch it, the way their eyes flickered toward me like I was an amusing mistake they couldn't quite erase from the room. Elise, my daughter-in-law, sat across from me. Her black dress shimmered under the chandelier, her lips painted a deep shade of red. She looked every bit the perfect hostess. But I saw it, that little twist of her mouth, the smirk she couldn't hold back whenever I lifted my fork clumsily or hesitated before answering someone's question. I wanted to disappear. "Do you remember?" Clara said suddenly, her voice lilting with the cruel innocence only youth seems to have, "when you tried to help us with our school math homework. Oh my God, you couldn't even divide properly." Mark and I still laugh about it. Laughter spilled across the table. Even my own daughter lowered her head, pretending to sip her wine so she wouldn't have to look at me. I pressed my lips together and tried to focus on the food. The roast beef looked beautiful pink in the center, a dark crust around the edges, but my stomach refused it. I cut a slice just to keep my hands busy, the silver knife clinking against the plate louder than it should have. "That's enough," my son muttered, though his voice lacked weight. He said it the way you scold a child in public, just enough to feel like you've done your duty, but not enough to actually stop anything. The laughter simmered down, but I could still feel it in the air, like smoke that clings to your clothes long after the fire is gone. And then, from the far end of the table, came the sound that silenced everyone, the sound of a glass being placed carefully, almost ceremonially, back onto the table. Grandpa Heath was my late husband's father, nearly 90, but his eyes were as sharp as ever, blue, piercing, a little frightening when they fixed on you. He rarely spoke during these gatherings. Mostly, he ate in silence, observing, letting the world go on around him, as though he had already seen too much of it. But tonight, his voice carried like a bell. "Do you all even know what she gave up for you?" The words fell into the room like stones into water. Mark stopped mid-laugh, his mouth still open. Clara froze with her fork halfway to her lips. Elise leaned back, her smile faltering as though someone had pulled the ground out from under her. My heart jumped. I hadn't expected him to speak, least of all to speak about me. "Grandpa, please," Elise began gently, trying to regain control of the atmosphere. "We were only—" He cut her off with a single wave of his hand. His hand trembled with age, but his voice didn't. "No, you weren't only joking, you were mocking. And it ends tonight." The fire in the stone fireplace crackled, throwing shadows against the walls, but the room felt colder now, as though a draft had crept in. I swallowed hard, my fork slipping from my hand and clattering against the plate. Grandpa turned his eyes to me. For the first time in years, I saw something in them I hadn't seen before, something fierce, something protective. "You sit there," he said slowly, his gaze sweeping across the table, "and you think she's weak. You think she's foolish. You laugh at the way she speaks, at the way she dresses, at the choices she made. But you don't know. None of you know." Elise crossed her arms. "With respect, Papa, maybe now is not." He slammed his hand down on the table. The wine glasses trembled. "Now is exactly the time." The room froze. I wanted to stop him. My throat tightened as if I could swallow the words before he spoke them, but it was too late. Memories I had worked so hard to bury clawed their way up. Cold nights in a tiny Paris flat. The sound of unpaid bills sliding through the mail slot. My husband's voice, weak and fading, in a hospital bed. Grandpa's eyes glistened. His voice softened, but it carried even more weight. "You laugh at her," he said, "but you are laughing at the very person who saved all of you." A stunned silence filled the room. The only sound was the faint hiss of the fire and the clink of someone nervously setting their fork down. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, now confused, suspicious, waiting. My son leaned forward slightly, his brow furrowed. My daughter's lips parted as if to speak, but she said nothing. Grandpa took a shaky breath, his hand resting on his cane. "It's time they knew," he whispered, almost to himself, but loud enough for everyone to hear, and in that moment, I knew the past I had buried for so long was about to be unearthed, whether I was ready or not. If you're still here, please don't forget to subscribe to Myla Stories. I share stories that come straight from the heart. The air in the room thickened. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. Grandpa's gaze locked onto me, and for the first time in decades, I saw the truth reflected in someone else's eyes, the truth I had carried alone, and just like that, dinner was no longer about food, or laughter, or even family. It was about secrets, secrets that had been waiting far too long to be revealed. The silence at the table was so heavy, I could hear the faint ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway. Every second stretched like an eternity. Grandpa's words still lingered in the air. "You are laughing at the very person who saved all of you." My daughter, Sophie, finally broke the silence. What do you mean, Grandpa?" Her voice was tight, uncertain. She glanced at me, then quickly away, as though she wasn't sure if she even wanted the answer. Elise shifted in her seat, smoothing the fabric of her dress, her face tense, but trying to remain composed. "I think this has gone too far. Let's enjoy dinner." "No." Grandpa's voice cut like a blade. "They need to know." He leaned forward, his knuckles pale, as he pressed against the table for support. His eyes, once sky blue but now clouded with age, locked onto each of them in turn. "Do you think this house paid for itself? Do you think your schooling, your comfort, your privileges came out of nowhere? You sit here mocking the woman who gave you everything." My son Julien frowned. "Papa, please, let's not turn this into." Grandpa's cane struck the floor with a sharp crack. "Enough. You don't remember because you were too young. And he gestured at me, never wanted you to know. She carried it all in silence, like a soldier." A lump rose in my throat. My hands trembled in my lap, hidden beneath the table. I had buried those years so deep, convinced that if I never spoke of them, the pain would eventually fade. But now the memories came rushing back, vivid and merciless. Flashback. The winter, after his death. Paris, 1998. The winter was brutal that year. The city lights glowed beautifully for those who had money to enjoy them. But for me, each lamppost only seemed to cast longer shadows on my life. I remember clutching my coat tighter as I walked home from the hospital. The doctor's words echoed in my ears, "I'm sorry. There's nothing more we can do." My husband, Henry, was gone, and with him, the fragile balance of our lives collapsed. At home, the children slept soundly. Sophie curled against her blanket, Julien's toy car still clutched in his small hand. I stood in the doorway, watching them, my tears falling silently. They were so young, so innocent. They had no idea how our world had just shattered. The next morning the landlord came, a notice in his hand, rent overdue. Henry had left debts I hadn't known about. His business, the one everyone thought was thriving, had been drowning quietly. And now, all of it was on me. I didn't tell the children. How could I? Instead, I sold my jewelry, the necklace my mother had given me on my wedding day, the gold bracelet Henry once saved 3 months' wages to buy. I sold them piece by piece, just to keep us afloat, and still, it wasn't enough. I worked 3 jobs: cleaning offices at dawn, waitressing in the afternoons, scrubbing floors at night. My hands cracked from the cold water, my back ached until I could barely stand. But I never let the children see. At dinner, I forced a smile, placed a simple meal on the table, and pretended everything was fine. But it wasn't fine. Every night, when they were asleep, I cried silently into my pillow. Back at the table in Lyon, my eyes burned with the memory. Elise tilted her head, her tone sharp. "Are we really supposed to believe this? That you worked yourself to the bone? Why hide it, if it were true?" Grandpa's face darkened. "Because she is stronger than all of you combined." She didn't want pity. She wanted her children to grow up proud, not burdened by shame. Sophie's lips trembled. "Mama, is that true?" I opened my mouth, but no words came out. My chest tightened, the weight of years pressing down. Finally, I whispered, "Yes." The words seemed to hang in the air. Julien's eyes narrowed. "But why didn't you ever tell us?" "We thought." He paused, then shook his head, unable to finish. I knew what he meant. They thought I was stingy, cold, that I never wanted to spend money, never allowed them luxuries. They didn't know that every franc I saved went into keeping them warm, fed, and in school. I forced myself to meet their eyes, because children shouldn't grow up thinking their lives are built on sacrifice. You deserved to feel safe, to feel normal. Grandpa's voice was firm. She carried the burden so you wouldn't have to. And you, his gaze swept the table again, mock her as if she were nothing. The room was suffocating now. Elise's eyes darted nervously, as if she wanted to change the subject. But no one was listening to her anymore. For the first time in years, the weight of my silence felt unbearable. Flashback, the letter there was something else. Something I had never told anyone. A letter. Weeks after Henry's death, it arrived by post, stained, the ink smudged by water as though someone had cried while writing it. It was from him, from Henry, written days before he passed, when he knew the end was near. In it, he confessed the truth about the debts. He admitted he had hidden them from me out of pride, out of fear of being seen as a failure. And he wrote one final request: forgive me and protect the children. You are stronger than me. I know you will save them, even if it costs you everything. I folded the letter and hid it away in a small box under my bed. I never showed anyone, not Grandpa, not the children, no one, because admitting it would make it all real. At the table, my breath caught in my throat. Grandpa's eyes flickered toward me, almost knowingly, as if he, too, remembered something I had thought was forgotten. Elise, he said, his voice calm now, almost sorrowful. You mock her for not fitting into your perfect little picture. But without her, there would be no picture. There would be nothing. Do you understand? No one spoke. The fire crackled. Somewhere outside, a dog barked in the distance. And then Sophie whispered, almost to herself, I don't remember. I don't remember any of that. I just remember Mama always being tired, always saying no when we wanted things. I thought you didn't care. Her words pierced me deeper than any laughter ever could. I wanted to reach for her hand, to explain, to undo years of misunderstanding. But the words caught in my throat. How do you tell your children that their entire childhood rested on sacrifices they never saw? Grandpa leaned back in his chair, his breath heavy. It's only the beginning, he said softly. There's more they need to know. A chill ran down my spine. He was right. The truth wasn't finished yet. Grandpa's words echoed in the dining room, bouncing off the walls like they had a life of their own. There's more they need to know. My children's eyes were fixed on me now, curious, confused, ashamed. Elise sat stiffly, her fork untouched, her lips pressed into a thin line, as though she could still will this conversation into silence. But silence was no longer possible. The fire in the hearth snapped loudly, sparks flying upward. Beyond the windows, the French countryside was bathed in moonlight, the skeletal branches of winter trees scratching against the glass as the wind passed through them. I lowered my gaze to my plate. The food had gone cold. My appetite had disappeared the moment the laughter began. But what weighed on me now wasn't the food, or the room, or even the stairs. It was memories I had hidden for decades, buried beneath forced smiles and small lies. And suddenly, like the floodgates breaking, I was back there. Flashback Lion, 1999. The city was loud, alive. Car horns echoed against narrow streets. Neon lights flickered above small cafes. The scent of fresh bread wafted from boulangeries as students laughed outside. But to me, Lion was nothing more than a battlefield. I lived in a cramped apartment above a laundromat. The ceiling leaked when it rained. The radiator hissed but barely worked. And the walls were thin enough that I could hear my neighbor's television every night. But it was cheap, and it was all I could afford. I woke before dawn each day, my body aching from too little rests. At 5 in the morning, I swept through cold office buildings, scrubbing floors, emptying trash bins, my reflection in the glossy marble tiles reminding me how tired I had become. By mid-morning, I rushed to a small cafe by the rain. The air smelled of coffee beans and butter. But I wasn't there to enjoy it. I tied on an apron and worked as a waitress, balancing trays, plastering on a smile, even when customers sneered or snapped their fingers at me like I was nothing more than part of the furniture. Then in the evenings, when my legs were already trembling, I went to clean apartments, wealthy people's homes, with chandeliers and expensive rugs that I vacuumed carefully, terrified I might break something I could never afford to replace. I earned just enough to cover rent, food, And the children's school supplies, sometimes not even enough. I remember one night vividly. It was raining, hard, the kind of rain that soaks you through no matter how tightly you clutch your coat. I had just finished my shift and was hurrying home. In the window of a shop, I saw a pair of shoes, teeny red shoes that would have fit Sophie perfectly. She had been asking for new ones for weeks. Hers had holes at the toes. I stood there in the rain, staring at those shoes. They cost more than I earned in 2 days of scrubbing. I pressed my forehead to the cold glass, my heart breaking. I didn't buy them. Instead, when I got home, I patched her old ones with needle and thread, whispering to myself that it was only temporary. She was too young to notice the difference, I told myself, but I noticed, and it ate me alive. Back in the dining room, I clenched my hands under the table. My palms still remembered the blisters from scrubbing floors, the sting of detergent in open cuts. Julien leaned forward, his brow furrowed. Mama, I don't remember any of that. I just remember you being strict, always saying no, always tired. His words were gentle, but they carried the sharpness of misunderstanding. I nodded slowly. Because I didn't want you to know. You were children. You deserved laughter, not worry. You deserved warmth, not fear. So I kept it all hidden. Sophie's voice was fragile. But you were alone. The words pierced me. Yes, I had been terribly alone. Every night, after I tucked them into bed, I cried quietly into my pillow so they wouldn't hear. And in the mornings, I wiped my face and started again. Flashback. The hidden humiliation there was a die. We'll never forget it. Julien was sick, a terrible fever. The doctor prescribed medicine, but I couldn't afford it. I walked into the pharmacy, my hands trembling, and begged the pharmacist to let me pay later. He looked at me like I was dirt, like I was nothing. People in line behind me sighed, rolled their eyes. I wanted to vanish into the floor, but I stayed. I begged for my child, and when I walked out with that medicine, humiliation burning in my chest, I promised myself no one would ever see me that way again. That's when I made the choice. I would never speak of it, never show weakness, never admit how bad it had been. The dining room blurred in front of me as the memory faded. Elise cleared her throat sharply, her voice carrying that clipped edge she used whenever she wanted control. All of this, she said, her hands folding neatly in her lap. It's very dramatic, but surely we would have known. Surely someone would have seen. Grandpa's eyes snapped to her. Do you think strength is always loud, Elise? Do you think sacrifice announces itself with trumpets? No, the greatest strength is silent, invisible. And she, he gestured at me, was stronger than you will ever be. Elise flushed, her jaw tightening. She looked down at her plate, suddenly very interested in her untouched food. Julien swallowed hard. Mama, why didn't you tell us? We thought you didn't care, that you didn't want us to have nice things. My voice cracked. Because I wanted you to believe your childhood was normal. I wanted you to feel safe, even if it meant you hated me for being strict. If that was the price, I was willing to pay it. Sophie's eyes glistened. All those nights you came home late. I thought you didn't want to spend time with us. I reached across the table, my hand trembling as it hovered near hers. She hesitated, then let me take it. For the first time in years, I felt her grip warm, hesitant, but real. The present cracks. The room was still. Nobody laughed anymore. The mockery had been replaced by something heavier, shame. Grandpa leaned back, his breath ragged. This is only the beginning. You've heard pieces, but there's one truth you still don't know. One secret she's kept even from me. My chest tightened. I knew what he was about to say. The letter, the one hidden in the small wooden box under my bed. I shook my head slightly, silently pleading. Not that. Please, not that. But Grandpa's eyes met mine, and I saw it. He remembered. Somehow, he knew, and suddenly, I realized whether I was ready or not, my children were about to learn everything. The room had gone quiet after Grandpa's words. The clinking of cutlery, the shallow laughter, the smug comments, they had all dissolved into heavy silence. I could hear the fire hissing softly in the hearth, the distant hum of wind against the windows, and my own heartbeat hammering in my ears, across the table. Elise lifted her wineglass. Slowly, deliberately. Her movements were calm, calculated, like someone who refused to let their masks slip. No matter how many cracks appeared underneath, she sipped, then set the glass back down with a faint clink, and then she smirked. Not a smile, not kindness, a smirk, as if everything that had just been revealed, every word about my sacrifices, my sleepless nights, my years of humiliation, was nothing more than an exaggerated story she could dismiss with a tilt of her head. Her voice was sharp, polished, dismissive. "Well," she began, her eyes sweeping across the table, "it's very touching. All these tales of suffering, the scrubbing floors, the patched shoes, the long nights. But forgive me if I don't clap. Everyone struggles, don't they? Everyone sacrifices. That's life. Why should this be treated as some grand revelation?" Julien flinched. Sophie's lips parted, ready to object, but she hesitated. She had never been good at speaking against Elise. Few were. Elise's presence filled the room, the kind of presence that could make others feel small without her even raising her voice. But Grandpa was not small. His hands slammed against the table, rattling glasses. "Enough." His voice, though aged, cut through the room like a blade. "Do not belittle what you cannot understand." Elise didn't flinch. She simply arched one brow, her smirk deepening. "I'm not belittling," she replied, her tone cool. "I'm just saying if it was so bad, why hide it? Why not ask for help? Why let your children think you were cold, unloving, strict? That was your choice. Don't blame them for not appreciating what they never knew." Her words stabbed, because in a way, she was right. It had been my choice, but it was a choice made out of love, out of desperation to protect. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, because children shouldn't carry burdens meant for adults. I thought if I could hold it all together, even if it broke me, at least they'd have a chance at a childhood free from fear. Sophie's voice cracked. "And we blamed you. All this time, we blamed you." Her eyes filled, and I felt the guilt rush over me again, heavier than ever. Flashback, a childhood birthday. I saw it then, like a film playing in my mind. It was Sophie's 8th birthday. I had worked double shifts that week, barely sleeping, just to buy her a small cake from the bakery down the street. I remember walking in, the scent of vanilla and sugar filling the air, and the woman behind the counter asking if I wanted extra decorations. I couldn't afford them, but I nodded anyway. That night, Sophie blew out her candles with her friends gathered around, their laughter ringing through the apartment. She smiled, she laughed, she hugged me tightly. But behind that smile, I remembered the envelope in my pocket, the overdue rent notice, the landlord's warning, the fear that tomorrow we might be out on the street. I hid it all. I hid everything. Back in the dining room, Elise's smirk remained. She tapped her finger against the stem of her glass. "Perhaps, but secrets always come back, don't they? And if you've hidden so much, maybe there's more you haven't told us." My breath caught. The letter. I could feel Grandpa's eyes on me, heavy, knowing. Julien leaned forward. "What is she talking about?" I shook my head. "It's nothing." But Elise leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms with that same cold satisfaction. "Nothing, or something you're still too afraid to say." Her words coiled around me, squeezing, pressing. My heart raced. "Got Grandpa speaks. Grandpa speaks." Grandpa's voice came, softer this time, but no less powerful. "Elise, you sit there with your smirk and your glass of wine, thinking you're clever, but cleverness without compassion is nothing more than cruelty." Elise's eyes narrowed, her smirk fading for the first time. Grandpa turned to Julien and Sophie. His face was pale, his breath slow, but his words carried weight. "Your mother carried a burden none of you will ever fully grasp. She shielded you, even when it meant you turned against her. And yes, there is more. Something she's kept locked away for years, but it is not mine to tell. It is hers." The room stilled. All eyes turned to me. I felt like I was drowning. The walls seemed closer, the air thicker. Sophie whispered, almost pleading, "Mama, please, tell us." The breaking point. I opened my mouth, then closed it. My throat was raw, my chest heavy. The words hovered on my tongue, but they refused to leave. Elise leaned in, her eyes glittering. "See, she can't, because the truth would change everything you think you know." Her smirk returned, triumphant, cruel, and in that moment, something inside me broke. I slammed my hands onto the table, startling even Elise. My voice trembled but rang clear. "You want the truth. Fine, but once you hear it, you'll never be able to go back." The fire crackled. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. The children held their breath. I closed my eyes, and the memory of the letter came rushing back. The ink faded, the paper creased, the words that had haunted me for years, and I knew the time to reveal it was coming. The silence after my outburst stretched like a wire pulled too tight. No one moved. Even the fire in the hearth seemed to burn quieter, as though it, too, was waiting. Elise leaned back, satisfied, her smirk now sharp as a blade. "Well," she said, her tone mocking. "You've declared you have a truth, then give it to us." Julien turned to me, his face pale, his hands fidgeting in his lap. He was no longer the boy who once clung to me during thunderstorms, but in that moment, I saw the shadow of him there, frightened, uncertain. Sophie's eyes, wide and wet, searched my face for answers. Grandpa's hand reached across the table, his wrinkled skin brushing mine. His voice, soft but firm, steadied me. "You don't have to carry it alone anymore." But carrying it alone had become my habit, my identity. The years of silence weren't just silence, they were a shield. To speak now would be to shatter everything. I closed my eyes, exhaled, and whispered, "It was a letter." The room stiffened. "A letter?" Sophie asked. "Yes." My throat tightened, but the word pressed out anyway. "One I received many years ago, and it changed everything." The first time I saw it, the memory rushed back, vivid and sharp. It had been winter. Snow blanketed the narrow streets of our town, muffling the usual noise of life. The children were still in school, and I was working an extra shift at the bakery, kneading dough until my arms ached. When I arrived home that evening, exhausted and shivering, the letter was there, slipped beneath the door. No stamp, no return address, just my name, scrawled in handwriting I almost didn't recognize. I remember staring at it for minutes, afraid to open it. Something about it felt heavy, dangerous. When I finally tore it open, the words inside made my knees buckle. "Back to the dinner." I stopped, unable to continue. Sophie leaned forward. "What did it say?" Elise's voice cut in sharply. "Yes, what did it say?" Her hunger wasn't for truth, it was for power. She wanted control of the room, control of the story, control of me. I shook my head. "Not yet." Her smirk deepened. "Convenient." Grandpa coughed, leaning heavily against his chair. His voice cracked but carried strength. "She'd tell it when she's ready. Not before." "And you, Elise?" His eyes bore into her, sharp despite the years. "You will learn that smirks and whispers cannot erase what's written in ink." For the first time that evening, Elise faltered. Her lips tightened, her eyes darting away, if only for a second. The children's plea. Julien's voice trembled. "Mama, please. If it's something about us, about our family, we deserve to know." The weight of his plea broke something inside me. I wanted to protect them, even now, even as adults. But maybe protection had become a prison. Maybe silence had been a mistake. Still, I hesitated. "If you're still here," I whispered, my eyes flicking to the camera in my mind, as if speaking to unseen listeners, "please don't forget to subscribe to Myla Stories. I share stories that come straight from the heart." My words lingered like a breath before a storm. Flashback, the night after the night I first read the letter, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the snow fall in slow, endless sheets. The children were sleeping, their soft breaths steady in the silence of the flat. I held the paper in my hands until the edges tore, until the ink smudged beneath my trembling fingers. I read it again, and each time, the truth struck deeper, crueler. I remember whispering to myself, "I can never tell them, not ever." And so I didn't. For years, I carried it in silence, folding it into the deepest corners of my heart, locking it away where no one could reach. But tonight, the lock was breaking. Present day. The ultimatum. Sophie reached for my hand across the table. "Whatever it is, Mama, we're strong enough now. Please, don't let Elise turn it into poison. Tell us." Julien nodded, his voice steadier now. "We need to know all of it." Elise's eyes glittered, her voice cutting like glass. "Or perhaps she's lying. Perhaps there is no letter at all." The words hit me like a slap. Grandpa's fist tightened. "Watch your tongue." Elise smiled coolly. "What? I'm just pointing out the obvious. How convenient to bring up some mysterious letter only when cornered. How convenient to use it as a shield rather than a truth." The air around the table thickened. My chest ached. I reached into my handbag, the same worn leather bag I had carried for years. Slowly, carefully, I pulled out a folded piece of yellowed paper. The room froze. Elise's smirk faltered. Sophie gasped softly. Julien leaned so far forward. His chair creaked beneath him. I placed the letter on the table, my hand trembling. "There," I whispered. "It's real, and if I read it aloud, everything will change. The cliffhanger. No one spoke. No one breathed. The letter sat between us, fragile yet explosive, like a fuse waiting for a spark. Elise's eyes darted to it, hungry, fearful. Grandpa's gaze softened, full of sorrow and strength. Sophie and Julien stared as though the paper itself might shatter their world. I closed my eyes, inhaled, and said, "Tomorrow, you'll hear the truth. Tonight, you'll sit with the weight of it." The fire popped in the hearth. The clock ticked on, and for the first time in years, I felt the silence was no longer mine alone. The night after I placed the letter on the table was the longest of my life. Sleep didn't come. Even the old clock in the hallway seemed louder than usual. Its ticking, dragging me through every minute, every hour, as though mocking the years I had wasted in silence. When dawn finally broke over the town of Colmar, its half-timber houses dusted with frost, I knew there would be no turning back. The morning tension at breakfast. No one spoke. The smell of coffee filled the room, but no one reached for their cups. My daughter Sophie traced the rim of her mug with her fingertip, her eyes red from a sleepless night. Julien sat hunched, shoulders tight, his jaw clenched in quiet determination. And Elise. Elise was the only one who seemed at ease, leaning back with her phone in hand, pretending to scroll. But her eyes flicked to the folded paper on the sideboard, again and again. Her calm, an act too fragile to last. Grandpa broke the silence first. His voice was rough with age but clear. "It's time." The words hung in the air like church bells after a funeral. I rose, my knees trembling, and retrieved the letter. My fingers brushed over the brittle fold, the ink that had faded but not enough to hide its cruelty. The children straightened in their chairs. Elise leaned forward at last, her mask slipping, her hunger for the words undeniable. The reading begins. I unfolded the paper slowly, the sound of crinkling parchment filling the silence. My hands shook, but my voice when it came was steady. "Was from your father." Sophie's hand shot to her mouth. Julien froze. Elise's eyes widened, then narrowed, searching for advantage. I began to read. "Clara, by the time you read this, I will be gone. I cannot live this lie any longer. For years I have been trapped between duty and desire, between the life I built and the life I wanted. The truth is, I love another woman, and I have loved her for a long time. She is expecting my child. By the time you find this letter, I will already be with her." The words cracked in my throat, but I forced myself to continue. "Please understand, it was never meant to be you. You were stability, kindness, responsibility, but not love. I stayed because of the children, but I cannot sacrifice myself any longer. I'm sorry for the pain this causes, but I have chosen my happiness, and I beg you not to tell the children the truth. Let them believe I was a coward, or cold, or gone, anything but this. Let them hate me, if it spares them the truth." The silence afterward was unbearable. Sophie's face crumpled, tears spilling before she could stop them. Julien's fists clenched, his jaw rigid, his eyes blazing with disbelief and rage. Elise, however, sat back in her chair, a smile flickering at her lips, as though she had just won a battle she hadn't even fought. The children's reactions. Voice broke through first, raw and furious. "So he left us. He left us for her." His fists struck the table, rattling the cups. "And all these years I thought you drove him away, Mama." The words cut deeper than any blade. Sophie sobbed, her shoulders trembling. "Why didn't you tell us?" Her voice was softer, wounded, like a child reaching for a hand in the dark. I swallowed hard. "Because I wanted to protect you. You were children. You deserved stability. To know that your father chose someone else, chose another family. I couldn't give you that burden, so I carried it alone." Tears blurred my vision, but I held their gaze. "I carried it because I loved you." Elise's laugh broke through the pain, sharp and cruel. "So that's it. That's the grand revelation. That your sainted husband was just another liar, who ran off with a mistress." She leaned forward, her tone mocking. "And you, Clara, you let everyone believe you were the problem. You let your own children turn against you. All this time, you played the martyr." Her words were poisoned, but the smirk on her face betrayed her fear that the truth was no longer hers to twist. Grandpa slammed his hand on the table. The sound boomed through the room, enough. His voice, ragged but powerful, silenced Elise. His eyes, blazing with a rare fury, turned on her. "You fed on her silence for years, whispered your lies, stoked their doubts, but no more. Truth is here now, and it is not yours to twist. Elise flinched, her mask cracking. The weight of the truth. Julien stood, pacing the room, his hands gripping his hair. All these years, his voice cracked, all these years, I hated you, Mama. I thought you were the reason he left. I thought you pushed him away. His chest heaved as he turned toward me, but it was him, all along. He betrayed us. Sophie rose and wrapped her arms around me, sobbing into my shoulder. You shouldn't have carried this alone. You shouldn't have. I held her tightly, my tears mingling with hers. I thought I was protecting you. I thought silence was love. Grandpa's voice softened. Sometimes silence is the loudest wound of all. The cliffhanger for the first time in years. The truth sat in the open air. It was ugly, painful, undeniable, but it was real. And yet, as I folded the letter back into my trembling hands, I realized something chilling. The story wasn't over. Because in the final line of the letter, one I hadn't read aloud, one I had hidden even from myself, there was another truth. A name. The name of the woman he had chosen. And it was a name we all knew. I sat there at the dining table, the letter trembling in my hands. The air felt thick, as if the walls of the old Alsatian house had closed in on us. My breath came shallow, and I could hear the faint whistling of the wind outside the window. But inside, the silence was unbearable. I had read the cruel words enough to break Sophie and Julien's hearts, enough to strip away the lies Elise had nurtured for years. But I hadn't read everything. There was one last line, one last truth, and I had buried it even from myself. The hidden line. My fingers traced the final fold of the paper. I could feel Sophie's grip on my shoulder, Julien's restless pacing behind me, Grandpa's steady eyes urging me forward, and Elise's smirk, her certainty that this revelation had only shattered me further. But none of them knew. No one but me had seen the last line, written hastily in a scrawl that betrayed both excitement and cowardice. I unfolded it once more, my eyes burning as I read aloud. Her name is Anna. The name dropped like a stone into the silence. Sophie gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Julien froze mid-step, staring at me as though I had spoken a ghost into the room. Grandpa's face paled, his features tightening, with something I hadn't seen in decades, fear. And Elise blinked, her smirk faltering for the first time. Who was Anna? Julien's voice cracked through the stillness. Anna, not. He stopped himself, choking on the thought. Sophie whispered, it can't be. I lowered the paper, my voice trembling. Yes, Anna Dupont. The woman who lived just 3 streets away. The woman who used to sit in this kitchen, drink coffee with me, share stories about her husband who traveled too much for work. My friend. The word friend broke inside me, bitter and jagged. Julien swore under his breath, slamming his fist against the sideboard. He betrayed you with her, with someone we all knew. Sophie sobbed harder, shaking her head. She used to braid my hair when I was little. She gave me birthday gifts. She was like an aunt to me. And then, Grandpa spoke. His voice was hoarse, his eyes dark with memories. Anna was more than that. She was here before Clara. She loved him before Clara ever came into the picture. My heart jolted. What up, Toll? Eyes turned to Grandpa. Grandpa's confession. He sighed heavily, leaning on his cane. I never wanted to say it. I thought burying the past would protect you all. But the truth has a way of bleeding through. His eyes fixed on me. Clara, when Henry, your husband, was a young man, he was in love with Anna. Everyone in the village knew it, but her family disapproved. They sent her away to stay with relatives, hoping the distance would kill the affection. By the time she came back, Henry had already met you. My chest tightened, my breath catching. So, I was second choice. Grandpa's voice softened with regret. No, you were his wife. You gave him a home, children, stability. But Anna, she was the one he never let go of. Even after she married another man. Even after she had her own family. The flame never died. The room tilted around me. The betrayal was no longer just mine, it was woven into the fabric of our entire lives. Elise seizes the moment. Elise's laughter sliced through the heaviness. So there it is. You were never enough, Clara. You built your life on a lie, and you hid it from everyone, even from your children. Her words were like knives, and for a moment, I thought I would collapse under them. But Sophie rounded on her, her face streaked with tears. Shut up, Elise. You don't get to say that. You don't get to sit there and enjoy this. Elise smirked. Enjoy? Oh, I'm not enjoying it. I'm just enlightened. Now I see where this family's rot truly began. Julien's fist slammed the table again, rattling the cutlery. Enough, Elise. You've been poisoning us for years. And Mama stayed silent because she was trying to protect us from this filth. For the first time, Elise felt quiet, her eyes narrowing, but her voice failing her. The unspoken wound. I sank into my chair, the letter still in my trembling hands. The name Anna echoed in my mind like a cruel refrain. The woman I had trusted, the woman I had confided in, the woman who smiled at me while secretly holding my husband's heart. Tears burned my eyes. But beneath them was something else, something fierce, something I hadn't felt in years. I was his wife, I whispered, my voice steadier than I expected. He may have loved her first. He may have chosen her in the end. But I was the one who stood by him, who raised his children, who carried the weight of his betrayal in silence. My eyes locked on Elise's, and I will not let you, or anyone else, rewrite that truth. Cliffhanger. The letter slipped from my hand, falling to the floor. Julien bent to pick it up, his face pale but determined. We need to know, he said. We need to know what happened to her, to Anna. If she had his child, then we're not the family we thought we were. Sophie's breath hitched. You mean, we could have a brother or sister out there? The words hung in the air like thunder. And in that moment, I realized the past wasn't just a wound, it was a doorway, and once we stepped through it, nothing would ever be the same. The dining room had grown unbearably heavy, as if the walls themselves carried the weight of secrets that had been buried for too long. The name Anna still echoed through us, like a crack in the earth that no one could seal shut. Julien paced, again, restless, his hand clutching the old letter, as though it might suddenly grow more words if he stared at it long enough. Sophie sat frozen, her lips trembling, her eyes fixed on me, bleeding, searching for reassurance I couldn't give. Grandpa sat with his cane across his lap, his expression grim, as though he had expected this storm all along. And Elise, she sat, smugly though, the sharp edges of her confidence had dulled. For the first time, she wasn't in control. A family torn in two. Julien finally broke the silence. We have to find out. If she had his child, then we need to know who they are, where they are. Sophie shook her head quickly, panic in her eyes. No, Julien, please, we don't need more pain. We don't need to dig deeper. Her voice cracked, and she buried her face in her hands. We've lost so much already. Why open wounds that can never heal? But your jaw was set, because this isn't just about wounds, Sophie. It's about truth, our blood. We can't live our lives with this shadow hanging over us. His eyes flicked toward me, as if asking for permission. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. My heart told me to let it die here, to protect my children from further hurt. But another part of me, the part that had carried this secret for decades, knew that silence had already cost too much. I whispered, we need to know. The first Julien exhaled sharply, as though my words freed him. Then, we start with Anna. Where is she now? Grandpa's eyes clouded with memory. She left the village years ago. After her husband died, she couldn't bear to stay. She moved south, near Lyon, I believe. But, he hesitated, his grip tightening on his cane. There were whispers, rumors, that she didn't leave alone, that she had a child. Sophie lifted her head, her eyes wide with disbelief. Child, but she never mentioned it. I don't remember ever seeing. She wouldn't have told you, Grandpa said quietly. It wasn't her husband's child. Everyone suspected, but no one dared to say it aloud. The room fell into stunned silence. Elise leaned forward, her voice low, dripping with satisfaction. So it's true. You're not even a whole family. You've always been half built on lies. Julien turned on her, his voice sharp as a blade. Say one more word, Elise, and you'll regret it. For once, Elise backed down, her smirk fading into the shadows of the candlelight. An old neighbor's memory later that night, when Sophie had retreated to the kitchen to calm herself and Julien was hunched over the letter again. Grandpa beckoned me closer. His eyes were tired but steady. Clara, he said softly, there's someone you should speak to, someone who might still remember, old Madame Fournier. She lived next to Anna's house all her life. If anyone knows the truth about that child, it's her. I nodded slowly, the weight of it pressing on me. Madame Fournier was nearly 90 now, frail and half forgotten by the town. But her memory was sharper than any knife. She had been the village's silent witness for decades. Visiting Madame Fournier the next morning, Julien drove me through narrow cobblestone streets, lined with shuttered windows and winter flowers wilting in their pots. The town seemed smaller, now, quieter, as though it too carried the burden of untold stories. We stopped outside a weathered cottage, ivy curled along the walls, and the faint scent of wood smoke drifted from the chimney. Inside, Madame Fournier sat in her armchair, her eyes clouded with age, but gleaming with recognition. "Clara," she rasped, her voice trembling with both warmth and something darker. "I wondered if you would come, one day." I sat beside her, my hands trembling. "Madame, I need to ask about Anna." The old woman's gaze sharpened. "Ah, so the past has come knocking." Julien leaned forward. Did she have a child?" Madame Fournier's lips pressed into a thin line. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of an ancient clock on the wall. Finally, she whispered, "Yes." The confirmation. Julien stiffened. My breath caught. "Yes," she repeated, her eyes glistening. "Anna left this town with a child, a boy. He would be in his 40s by now. I remember because she came to me in the dead of night, desperate, with a newborn wrapped in a blanket. She begged me never to tell a soul." My chest tightened, the air rushing out of me. A boy, Henry's son, the half-brother my children never knew they had. Julien's voice was hoarse. "Where did they go? Where did she take him?" Madame Fournier's hands trembled on the armrest of her chair. "South, to Lyon, as you've heard. But after that," she shook her head. "I never saw her again." Cliffhanger. Julien rose, abruptly, pacing across the small room, his fists clenched. "We have to find him. We can't just leave this buried. He's our family, whether we like it or not." I sat frozen, my mind spinning. Another son, Henry's son, out there, living a life we had no part in. Sophie's words from the night before echoed in my head. Why open wounds that can never heal? But the wound was already open. And now, it was bleeding. The night after our visit to Madame Fournier, sleep refused to come. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the glow of the moon casting pale shadows across the room. Every tick of the clock was louder than the last, reminding me that time was slipping away, time that could have been spent knowing the son Henry left behind. When morning finally came, I found Julien already awake, pacing the kitchen. A map spread out across the table beside his laptop. His eyes were red-rimmed, but his determination burned brighter than ever. "We start in Lyon," he said the moment he saw me. "We'll check the archives, the hospitals, even old parish records if we must. Someone must know where Anna went." His voice carried conviction, but it also carried desperation. He needed this truth as much as I feared it. Sophie's resistant Sophie entered the kitchen just then, her face pale from another restless night. She looked between us and the map. "You're serious," she whispered. "You're really going to chase ghosts?" Julien frowned. "Not ghosts. Blood, our blood." Her eyes flashed with anger. "And what happens when you find him, Julien? What then? Do you expect him to welcome you? To accept us? He doesn't even know we exist." Julien's voice rose, but not in fury, in ache. "Don't you see? That's exactly why we have to find him. He deserves to know." Sophie shook her head, tears welling. "Or maybe he doesn't. Maybe Anna never told him. Maybe he built his life on a lie, and you're about to tear it apart." The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. I finally said quietly, "We can't decide what he deserves without knowing him. Hiding truth never saved anyone. It only hurts more in the end." The journey to Lyon. By afternoon, Julien had packed the car, the map folded carefully on the dashboard. I went with him, unable to let him face this alone. Sophie stayed behind, her refusal sharp but understandable. She was terrified of what we might uncover. The drive south was long and gray, the winter sky heavy with clouds. Through winding roads and snow-dusted fields, I watched the countryside pass, each village reminding me of the one where Henry's secrets had been buried. Julien drove in silence, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. Only once did he speak, his voice low, almost to himself. "If we find him, do you think he'll hate us?" I hesitated, my throat tightening. "I don't know, Julien, but I know this. The truth has a way of setting people free, even when it hurts." Lyon, a city of answers. When we arrived in Lyon, the city greeted us with its sprawling riverbanks and narrow alleys lit by golden street lamps. It was alive, bustling, filled with voices and footsteps, yet it felt to me like a labyrinth of hidden stories. Somewhere in this maze, Henry's son had grown up. Our first stop was the old municipal archive. Dust lingered in the air as we combed through records, guided by an archivist who barely looked up from his spectacles. We searched birth certificates from the year Madame Fournier had spoken of. Hours passed, nothing. Julien's frustration grew with every turn of a page. He slammed one register shut, his voice trembling. She must have changed his name, or maybe she wanted him erased. I placed a hand on his shoulder. No, mothers don't erase their children. She protected him. That's what Anna did. Just as despair was about to overtake us, the archivist shuffled back into the room with a slip of paper. His voice was flat, but the words struck like lightning. There was a birth, he said, to an Anna Duval male child, registered without a father's name, address listed, but it was crossed out years later. Julien snatched the paper from his hand, his eyes scanning it feverishly. A name, an address, proof. We had him. Cliffhanger. Outside, the streets of Lyon bustled with life, but all I could hear was the rush of blood in my ears. Julien clutched the paper so tightly it might have torn. This is it, he whispered, breathless. We're close, so close. But deep in my chest, a cold weight settled, because for every step closer we drew, I felt another truth waiting for us, a truth I wasn't sure we were ready to face. The next morning, in Lyon, was bitterly cold. The sky was heavy with slate-gray clouds, the kind that pressed down on the city like a weight. Julien barely touched his breakfast. He was too consumed with the slip of paper he carried in his pocket. He held it like a compass, the single clue pointing us toward a man who might change everything. We walked through narrow streets lined with cafes, bakeries, sending out the scent of butter and coffee into the icy air. I thought of Henry then, and how strange it was to trace his shadow in a city he had hidden from us. Every step closer filled me with both anticipation and dread. The address took us to a quiet part of Lyon, far from the bustling markets. The buildings here were older, their stone walls weathered, shutters painted in fading colors. We stopped in front of a modest apartment block. The paint was peeling, but the windows were alive with the warmth of light. Julien stood frozen, staring at the door. His breath came in shallow bursts, as though the truth behind it might crush him. What if he hates us? He whispered. I reached for his arm. You'll never know unless you knock. The first meeting he did. 3 sharp raps echoed through the stairwell. Moments later, the door creaked open. A man in his 40s stood there, his features sharp but familiar to familiar. His eyes, Henry's eyes, widened at the sight of Julien. His hair was darker, his build leaner, but the resemblance was undeniable. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, the man's voice, cautious and low. Who are you? Julien swallowed hard. My name is Julien, and I believe we might be brothers. The man stiffened, his hand tightening on the doorframe. The truth unfolds inside. The apartment smelled faintly of tobacco and old books. We sat awkwardly at his kitchen table, mugs of untouched coffee cooling between us. His name was Mark. When Julien explained, Mark's expression hardened. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. So he told you nothing, Mark said. Bitterly, of course he didn't. Henry Dupont was a coward. He left my mother with nothing. She worked herself into the grave because of him. Julien's face paled. I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know. Mark's laugh was sharp, like glass breaking. And now you come here, thinking what? That I'd embrace you. That we'd be family. You are his son too. But you got the life he denied me. A bitter divide. Julien's hands trembled. I didn't choose this, Mark. None of us did. But we share his blood, whether you like it or not. Mark's eyes glistened with tears he refused to shed. Blood doesn't make family. Pain does. Sacrifice does. Where were you when she was sick? Where were you when I buried her alone? The words cut through the air, heavy with grief and anger. I felt Julien's shame burn beside me, and I knew there was nothing he could say to erase Mark's scars. A small crack of light, but as Mark's anger poured out, something shifted. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but exhaustion. His voice softened. Braken. She used to sit at this very table and whisper your father's name like a curse and a prayer all at once. I grew up hating him, but part of me still wondered if he ever thought of us. Julien's voice cracked. He did. I found letters. He wrote them, but he never sent them. I think he was afraid. Silence fell. Mark's jaw tightened, but his eyes betrayed him, a flicker of something other than rage. the choice after hours of tense conversation. Mark stood and walked us to the door. His final words lingered like frost in the air. I don't know what you want from me, but don't expect me to call you brother. Not yet. He closed the door gently, not with anger, but with finality. Julien stood there in the stairwell, shoulders heavy. He turned to me, his eyes wet. At least now I know. That's enough, isn't it? I touched his cheek, whispering, the truth is never easy, Julien, but it's always better than a lie. Reflection and the drive back through the French countryside, the world seemed quieter. Julien stared out the window, lost in thought. Maybe Mark would never accept him. Maybe the past was too broken to repair. But the chain of silence had been broken, and in that, there was a strange kind of peace. As the fields rolled by, I thought of Henry, a man who had loved, lied, and feared. A man who left behind 2 sons who carried both his blood and his burdens. And I thought of myself, sitting at that dinner table months ago, mocked by my own family, only to discover that sometimes the truth doesn't heal, but it frees. Closing lesson. When we returned home, I gathered everyone once more. My voice was steady, though my heart trembled. We can't erase the past, I told them, but we can choose what to do with the truth. We can let it divide us, or we can let it teach us. Pain shared is lighter than pain carried alone. And for the first time, I saw something soften in their eyes, because in the end, truth may wound, but it also binds, and family, no matter how fractured, is worth the fight. If you're still here, please don't forget to subscribe to Myla Stories. I share stories that come straight from the heart.